Think about it. I mean, that was it. That was the spiel on the radio. Think of the championship, Lando. Think if you want the team behind you for the championship, this is the right thing to do. What was that all about? The images of Nerval on the absolute limit in this test, first time out on the Hankook tyres. He's doing things with that car, and I verified this with a couple of F1 mates. He's doing things in that car that no F1 driver on the grid today could do. Lewis, and the amount of publicity and exposure and paparazzi and tifosi and all that stuff that's going to be around the team now it's going to be quite a big sort of animal to carry around with them, and to sort of get through all that down to the bare basics of going motor racing. It's not going to be easy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, Cameron. Very windy here in Spain at the moment. Beautiful day though, blue sky, sunshine as ever, as it has been for most of the winter. But yeah, a bit gusty today, so thinking twice about whether we'll be out on the course this afternoon. Golf course, that is.
Oh, behave yourself, Peter. Like, I don't know. We always
if not, we'll just sit by the pool where it's a bit sheltered and chill out.
Save us, Peter. I extend my sympathies. Bloody hell. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you the first question as compulsory. Between now and the last time that we spoke, what's the biggest motorsport news story that's piqued your interest?
The way Terry Neville's just got straight back into it. I can't not begin with that because I've always been very lucky to have something about motorsport that really gets me going. In some years it might have been Carlos Reutemann, it might have been Lewis Hamilton in more recent times, might even be Max, but for me over the winter to see how to come back from that FIA thing with the bow ties and all that stuff, and then to see what he did in that test in Finland a couple of days ago in the 2025 Hyundai i20N, just unbelievable. And if nobody's seen it, there is an incredible. I don't often, I'm not very organized in terms of other YouTube channels, but there's a YouTube channel out there, and it's a rather odd name, PASSATS, Passats, bit like the word VW Passats, but with an S, De Canto, Canto. Absolutely brilliant YouTube channel. No talking, no nonsense. This guy goes out to the tests for World Championship rallies, and he's in the snow doing these shots, and the images of Nerval on the absolute limit in this test, first time out on the Hankook tyres. He's doing things with that car, and I verified this with a couple of F1 mates. He's doing things in that car that no F1 driver on the grid today could do. The skill level is just beyond belief. So if you want an adrenaline rush, if you want to get in touch again with motorsport in terms of what it is to drive a car well, have a look at this stuff of Nerval testing the new Hyundai. And that applies right across motorsport. Obviously Formula One's the pinnacle, but I would say right now Nerval is right up there with Max as being one of the two most talented drivers on the planet. Just phenomenal. And to see that there on YouTube, just that testing, it's incredible. I don't know how he did it.
Oh. Talk to me, because I don't watch much.
I know that's not what you wanted to hear, Cameron, but I got to get it off my chest.
No. Since we've
just fabulous.
No, since we're bathing in the waters of WRC for a second, talk to me very quickly, Peter. There was a stage this year when Thierry, as you spoke to, was being sporting endeavour par excellence, right? Like he was driving blind, and there was all these. Talk to me about that, Peter. How does somebody drive blind in mist and fog and snow?
Yeah, fog. Yeah. Well, I did an interview with him after that rally of Chile, and that's when I think he pulled out 11 seconds or something on Tanak, something pretty impressive on his teammate in the same car. And it was a similar thing to Walter Roll, back in '81 in the Rally of Portugal, this thing in fog. A lot of it is to do with feel, anticipation, being aware of the space around you. And obviously you're looking at the side. You cannot look in front because there's too much glare. You're looking at the side of the car. And it's a question of being able to adapt to that and then relate what you're seeing from the side to what the car is doing dynamically. It's an unbelievable skill. And Terry's got that as well. It's just unbelievable to watch. And the other thing that impressed me so much about him this year was how he stayed very calm and cool and on the level in mentally and emotionally, despite a lot of stuff going on around him, particularly from Ogier giving him a lot of stuff in the press and saying he wasn't very quick and this and that, and he's tied up with Tanak, who's a big mate, and it was all kind of, it was a difficult situation, very difficult political situation. He just came through it beautifully, really good, sort of a case study on how to be a racing driver, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Just amazing. How anybody could not vote him the top three drivers in motorsport is completely beyond my comprehension.
Well, speaking to that, Peter, Autosport voted him number 10.
Well, there you go. What can I say?
Always on the money, as per usual.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my opinion, obviously, but it's my opinion based on watching him and watching a lot of motorsport over the years. And this guy is really good. Miss him at your peril is what I would say.
Oof. Speaking of characterizations and judgments over the course of a season, you've done the latest video up on the Peter Windsor channel is an interesting one, Mr. Windsor, a departure from your normal style of content where you're talking about Max Verstappen by the numbers.
Yeah.
And the chap that you had on said that Max Verstappen, because of the past 36 months, that when you normalise for anomalous instances, DNFs that were beyond his control, that he's right up there with the greatest in F1 history. Peter, now we're talking. Now the conversation isn't Max Verstappen versus Michael or Ayrton. The conversation is Max Verstappen versus Jim Clark for the greatest F1 driver. Chime in on that, Peter. This is chaos.
Yeah. Well, this is a friend of mine, Corey Passatoro, who I met years ago actually at a concours d'elegance that I was judging with a few other motor racing people in Rhode Island. And Corey actually lives in Rhode Island, and so we hooked up then. And because he's a musician, very talented musician, as you probably know. He plays the accordion, which is not an instrument that I'm in any way familiar with, but he plays it incredibly well. And if you listen to the back end of the videos that I've done, it doesn't sound like an accordion at all. I mean, it's just staggeringly good. And I've introduced him to a few motor racing people over the years, not the least of which was Helmut Marko, who immediately took a liking to his music, and he's done a lot of gigs with Helmut, and he knows the Red Bull people very well. He's a big Sebastian Vettel fan, big Ayrton Senna fan, but he's also massively aware of how good Max Verstappen is. So he's an interesting guy to talk to. And as he says at the front of the video, he is statistics in general is something that's in his brain. He loves stats, whether it's even financial stats. He just loves having CNBC on with the sort of ticker tape at the bottom and just watching these numbers change. He's got that sort of brain. So he's put together, not just recently, over a long period of time, a lot of stats that are very relevant to drivers across different eras, because he's taken the liberty, if that's the right word, of giving race wins to drivers that they deserve to have, if only the oil pump hadn't failed or the bird hadn't crashed into the rear wing end plate or whatever it was. So they're pretty well rounded and pretty nice. And yeah, it's kind of nice. Excuse me, it's kind of nice to see Jim Clark winning the '64 World Championship. No offense to John Surtees in Corey's stats, but you get the gist of what I'm saying there. And he's got Lewis with 8 World Championships as well on this system. But he doesn't need to fudge it much with Max to have Max's run, as it were, right up there with the very best. I mean, obviously, Alberto Ascari, 52, 53, was unbeatable, really. But it was kind of weird because Ferrari managed to persuade the FIA to switch to Formula 2 regulations for Formula 1 for those 2 years. And guess what? Ferrari managed to have a Formula 2 car perfectly suited to the regs, a little bit like 61. And so Ascari made perfect use of them, just as Max has always made perfect use of the Adrian Newey car. So yeah, they're really interesting stats. And as you say, one of the interesting things about it is how well Jim Clark comes out of it all, actually, compared with everybody, including Fangio, Lewis, Vettel, Michael. Jim Clark comes out really well, and that's not through anything other than, wow, look at what these stats are showing me. So yeah, I think you've got to sit with it, but you can freeze frame the stats because there's a lot of detail in the stats that's worth looking at in the videos. And I think we've got part 2 out today coming out today, or it's maybe out already. And it's a really, really interesting ride in terms of how good Max is and getting a feel for where he sits in the overall amongst the pantheons of Formula One and where the potential still is. How I mean, and Corey finishes, but it makes no excuses. Obviously at the moment Lewis is well ahead of him in terms of stuff, as is Michael, but he's catching him quickly.
Yeah, geez,
Yeah,
it's an
yeah, it's
interesting.
interesting, and it's interesting, isn't it, the choice of teammate now for Max, because against teammates so far, he's right at the top in terms of his stats, his success against teammates. No surprise, really, when you look at the teammates he's had. Although, as Corey says, it's a shame Daniel didn't stick with it for a bit longer because he would have won more races than Perez has for sure. But it's interesting that he's gone with Liam Lawson, I think, because this guy's pretty quick. He's not slow, but he's not going to be right there with Max, is he, on a race situation? So it's a good choice, I think, from Max's point of view. And I still think it's a great shame that Carlos Sainz isn't going there. But I was thinking about that more, having chatted to Corey after this video. And I'm wondering really whether it goes back to 2015, because when they were together at Toro Rosso, actually Carlos outqualified him over the year. It's interesting, isn't it? They're both in their rookie seasons, and Carlos outqualified him. And when Max got the drive in 16, he was just ahead of Carlos in qualifying, but not much. It was like a couple of tenths. And I wonder whether it's a bit of that sort of Fernando Alonso. I don't want Jarno Trulli anywhere near him. Thank you very much. I wonder whether there's a bit of that. If there is, that's the first chink in the armor I think we've seen from Max, kind of, because it's not as if it's not as if they've said we want you to have George Russell or we want you to have Charles Leclerc. It's slightly different with Carlos Sainz because he's not a George or a Carlo or a Charles Leclerc, you could say. But nonetheless, Max has obviously said no to Carlos, probably because of that.
Oof, it's Oh, this is very techy, Peter. So I think in 2015 there was the famous instance when they sent Monaco, where they sent in Yoss's eyes at least, where they sent Max out far too late, and then it was very, very political and Helmut Marko told the Toro Rosso guys at the time that you don't report to Franz Tost, you report to me, and you won't do anything to hinder Max Verstappen going forward. And then ever since then, it was almost like Camp Sainz and Camp Verstappen were almost diametrically opposed. So I understand from Horner and Max Verstappen's perspective, especially given the 2024 season that they had, that they'd be loath to almost renew those rivalries, especially if stasis and stability going into a season where convergence is going to be the main theme. Like, why would you want to make things unnecessarily difficult? That doesn't mean to say, Peter, that you're not right, that Carlos Sainz is the best driver was available to them. But I think
if I can just stop you there. I'm sad that he's not going there, not because I think he's the best driver that would have been available. I just think he would have been the right teammate for Max as well, because I don't think he would ever have beaten Max over a year. And Max has got a much wider scope of ability now in so many ways. So it's not that. It's just that I think he would have been very compatible with Max. And so I just wanted to make that point.
It's a good shout. I haven't heard that point put that way, Mr. Windsor. It's a good shout, but I think from Max's perspective, from Camp Verstappen perspective, I don't think they'd be too keen to renew rivalries with Camp Sainz. Of course, I think Max Verstappen has gone clear of Carl. I agree with you. I think Carlos would be the perfect glove to Max's hand. But I just think Camp, Jos, Raymond Vermeulen.
Yeah, maybe it's that. Maybe it's that. Maybe that it's a bit like why they never hired Alonso when he left Ferrari. Maybe they just think it would split the team down the middle. But I think that's a poor judgment, because Carlos is much more mature than that. He's a very intelligent guy, and he would be going back to Red Bull now in very different circumstances, and he'd be going back as a polished, mature, perfect other driver to Max Verstappen. I
Yeah.
think that's how it would have been. I don't think there would have been any ripping down the middle of the garage if Carlos had gone there. It's a shame. It's just a great shame, and it's just going to hurt me every time. I know people out there say, "Oh, Windsor, stop banging on about it," but I'm sorry. I will. I'll bang on whenever I want, and because it really hurts me. It's going to really hurt me to see Carlos climbing into a Williams every race. It really is. What a waste of a talent.
Yeah, just a tad. It will be a shame. Go on, let's talk about Checo Perez in the first instance. I suppose the pertinent question, Peter, is why did it take them so long? Rumoured to get rid in the summer break, and then just after Baku and Singapore, when again he underperformed around tracks where historically he's been really good. Why do you think it took Red Bull and Horner and Dr. Helmut Marko so long to dispense with Checo Perez's services?
It can only have been because of money. That's the only reason they would have re-signed him in the first place. The only reason they've taken so long now is a lot of money to untangle. So there would be no other reason. And I suspect now that he's getting the money that he feels is appropriate. And Red Bull are saying, well, we got to get somebody else. So yeah, we'll live with this, we'll live with that, and we'll keep this sponsor. We're going to lose that sponsor, and let's move forward because it's a whole new era anyway. So yeah, I think it's all been due to money.
Yeah. And I think that there is we've got reason to believe that part of the reason why they're getting rid of him is also like the downside, right? Because he's lost them 20 million in terms of constructors, 5 million in damage over the course of this season, particularly when you bear in mind that cost cap is now a thing. I think he's now a financial liability just as much as he is a performance.
Yeah, I mean, people love coming up with all those numbers, don't they? I mean, the damage is irrelevant, I think, in terms of the overall budgets you're talking about. The constructors, yeah, but then you water that down by saying, well, they're not, they've got a bit more testing time now, haven't they? And probably slightly better position in the pit lane at some circuits. I think there's always 6 one, half a dozen the other with the constructors. That's why, there's so much stuff about the Constructors' Championship, how important it is and the money, but for a team like Red Bull, it's not that important. It's nothing like as important as the Drivers' Championship. And as I say, they're going to have more CFD time now.
Oof. And then to parlay very, very succinctly, Peter, into why do you think they picked Liam Lawson over Yuki Tsunoda? Because this has been the point of contention, right? Yuki Tsunoda fans around the world are losing their mind. Performance-wise, he in head-to-head qualifying, he's 6-0 up on Liam Lawson in 2024. In the races where they've both finished, Yuki Tsunoda is 4-1 ahead of Liam Lawson. Do you think promoting Liam over Yuki was the right decision?
Well, if you look at the stats like that, you could say it's an unfair decision. But these sorts of decisions shouldn't just be based on stats. They've got to be based on more than that. They've got to be based on feel, the future, character, and other factors. The reality is he's a Honda driver. Honda are going to Aston Martin, and so the whole future there is a little bit weird, isn't it? And he'll probably end up being a reserve driver at Aston Martin, I would guess. And what'll happen to Felipe Drugovich then?
Oh, gosh.
By the way, speaking of Felipe Drugovich, did you hear that when Lance Stroll did that ridiculously incompetent thing in the Brazilian Grand Prix when he beached it, having just sort of spun and then drove into the gravel trap, thinking there'd be great traction or whatever he was thinking? Did you hear that apparently all the grandstands were just chanting, Drugovich, Drugovich, Drugovich? Around those two corners. Brilliant. Anyway, getting back to it. So, as I said in the last live stream, I think a lot of it is how calm Liam comes over now and how sort of composed he is. He looks like a real pro, doesn't he? Whereas Yuki's got this sort of slightly weird emotion attacks that he has and screams and shouts down the radio. And I imagine he's probably a bit like that out of the car as well on occasion. Maybe not. I mean, the only stat I would look at, to be honest with you, apart from the fact that Yuki's driven very well in races and scored points on a number of occasions in 2024 and done very well there. But the real stat for me was when he beat Liam in that NASCAR thing on the dirt oval in those big stock cars, which neither of them had driven before. Both of them were completely new to. And as I said at the time, I think on our last live stream, you would imagine that Liam, Mr. Car Control, Mr. Oversteer, would destroy Sonoda around that, be right up his street. And yet Yuki was quicker. Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So that if I was pushing for Liam Lawson at the time, I would have thought, that's a bit odd. Why is Yuki beating him there? That's Yuki's obviously very, very talented. So what am I getting around to saying? I suppose, I don't know. Maybe they thought, well, a lot of New Zealanders have done very well in Formula One in the past. It's a great history there. I know there is in Japan too, but there's a great history of great New Zealand drivers doing it. And he's in that mold, isn't he? And, the whole Colin Giltrap sponsorship program. Sadly, Colin no longer around passed away earlier this year to enjoy watching Liam get into Formula One. And he did so much for the careers of both Liam and Marcus Armstrong. And anyway, that's just by the by. But there's a lot of history there, a lot of heritage. And I just think they think that given this opportunity with Max in the other car, Liam will carry that responsibility very, very well. And they can rely on him. And he's just a good guy for the future. And I suppose they think Sonoda is just a little bit more emotional and therefore slightly less reliable.
Absolutely.
I guess that's what they're thinking, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. So Christian Horner on the TalkSport, on TalkSport said that Yuki Tsunoda has been in there. He's been in F1 4 years, and by dint of Liam Lawson's inexperience and the fact that the stats are the stats, right? But if you look at the individual deltas in quali and in the race, that Liam Lawson has been super close to Yuki Tsunoda. So
he has, yeah. I mean, he's often, and he's done really well in qualifying and the race. There's no doubt about that. He's got a lot of talent. As I say, I doubt TalkSport would have asked him about what happened on that dirt oval and why he got beaten by Yuki. No. That's the question to ask, I think.
Yeah.
Because there was plenty of chat afterwards. There was enough opportunity for Liam to make an excuse, but he didn't. It was just like, wow, Yuki, you beat me. And I thought that, I still think, those little things do matter. Those little things actually tell a little story. And so that's the question I would have asked.
Oof. All very techie, Mr. Windsor. Talk to me about Isaac.
Detail. It's not techie. It's just detail, isn't it?
Yeah. Talk to me about Isaac Hadjar. Because he's gotten the promotion to Racing Bulls, as they're now called. What do you make of him? Because they're again, conflict in the community. Men are saying that he was brilliant in F2, made a mistake in the season finale, and you can't chastise him necessarily for that. The other fragment of the community is saying every time you get him in an F1 car, he's more moaning than he is pole position. On what side of that fence do you sit, Mr. Windsor?
Well, I don't think you can ever judge these guys on what they do in those ridiculous Fridays they run in F1 cars. Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about during a test session? Yeah. No, they're just nonsense. I don't even know why they bother doing that, because it's just a waste of time. As Jack Doohan will tell you, I don't think he ever had a decent run, ever, did he? He did about 3, and all 3 of them were a complete mess. What is the point of those? They should just have much more. They should have what I always said, should have a second championship for all these drivers in last year's Formula One cars in different circuits all around the world in their own championship. If they had that, there'd be no issues at all. But they don't, of course. So they have to do this sort of hybrid, ridiculous testing thing. But I think he's looked really good in Formula 2. I mean, he definitely has a certain ability to be in the right place at the right time, to get through a situation, and to keep his cool. I wouldn't have said he's a moaner at all. I think I've got a lot of time for him. I think he's good. And I think he's probably the logical choice. He'd be a very calming influence, actually, probably alongside Yuki.
Do you think
good team,
so, Peter?
Sonoda, Hadjar. Yeah, I think it's a good team.
I thought he was more temperamental, mercurial even than
Not the
Yuki.
impression I get.
Wow.
You may well be right, but he looks to me to be pretty much in control of what he's doing.
Fair. I made a video the other day. He went on a podcast saying that they asked him who his favourite driver was, and he said Lewis Hamilton was always my idol, and Lewis Hamilton was the GOAT. And I said, if he's invested in lap time and winning races and therefore championships, then he should also be invested in building relationships. And that probably wasn't the most well-advised thing to say, bearing in mind he's a part of the Red Bull Junior program and Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton are almost diametrically opposed. Do you think that's an overreaction from Cameron there, Windsor?
Maybe you've seen a bit more of him than I've just seen him on the racetrack and listened to him on the radio. I think he's professional, calm, smooth, very, very polished, very talented, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in the car. I'm a bit disappointed all these young guys always say Lewis Hamilton or Ayrton Senna or Michael Schumacher. Why doesn't somebody have a brain and say, oh, Alberto Ascari? I mean, if that's Mario Andretti's hero, that's my hero. I never saw him, obviously, but what a driver. Or Bernd Rosemeyer, what a cool guy. To go over to Long Island and win the Vanderbilt Trophy the way he did in that auto union just before the war, what a thing to do. Why don't they ever say things like that? Why do they always have to say the obvious?
Mr. Windsor,
there pathetic, isn't it? Really,
you assume length and breadth of F1. No motorsport.
Well, it's just the thing. Oh, it's before my time. I wasn't around then. Well, yeah, there are things called books.
I don't have time. I don't think you.
I think most of them can read, can't they, or not? Maybe not. But they can't heel and toe. They can't read, I suppose.
No, way before their time, Mr. Windsor. I genuinely don't think they even have. I don't think they're even incentivized. There's no willing to go back and trawl through the books of motorsport history.
Wouldn't it be great if Christian Horner said, well, you can look at the stats and you can look at this, you can really draw whatever conclusion you want from the stats, although we have a big question mark about that day when they ran the NASCAR stockers on the quarter mile oval, but we'll put that to one side. Of course, what we really did as a decisive thing was to set an examination based on the history of the sport going back to 1914, as you would, and it's, we're delighted to say that Liam Lawson got 82% and Yuki Tsunoda got 43%, and that's why he's got the drive. When it came down to it, how many non-championship races did Chris Amon win? Liam Lawson knew the answer and Yuki Tsunoda didn't.
Wow.
Wouldn't it be great if it was that? But it's not, sadly, is it?
It would never. We are dreaming. That's an F1 utopia, Mr. Windsor. That will never get to
we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for those guys before us. That's for sure.
100%. 100%. Go on.
So let's show a little bit of respect.
No, I would agree with that.
And I'm not talking to you now, Cam. I'm talking to the young drivers in general.
1,000%. But very, very well said. As we wrap up for the season that was 2024. I wanna pick your brain, Mr. Windsor, because again, another point of contention in the F1 community has been the order of drivers. Who was the best? Who was the second best over the course of the 2024 season? And who was the third best? In your opinion, Mr. Windsor, I want you to give me three drivers.
Well, I'd give Max number one for sure, for the way he drove when the car wasn't very good. And that is always a very telling point. And I thought he did really well when quite clearly the McLaren, and often not often, but sometimes the Mercedes and the Ferrari were quicker, and he was still there. And sometimes he was on the podium in that car, as we saw before, a few years ago when the Red Bull wasn't a winning car. So I'd still make him number one. And really, he deserved it only on that Brazilian Grand Prix win alone anyway. So yeah, there you go. They're number one. After that, it's very difficult. I know it's a cop-out, but I would give second equal to Lando Norris and George Russell. Oof. They can fight over it as much as they want. And the British press can fight over it as much as they want. I would give the very different drivers, different characters, obviously different teams, but in their own way, I think they were both superb this year. Not as good as Max overall, but really, really good in a number of different ways. And obviously they both have room for improvement in their own minds, in their own ways, I would hope. Oh. But I find it difficult to distinguish between those two and to rank one above the other. So I'd do that. And then fourth, it would be now, I'd give to Charles Leclerc.
Wow, Peter.
Who I think drove extremely well. Obviously, it's a platitude to say he drove extremely well. He did have a few off days, though, didn't he? There were a few things that weren't Max-like in his performance. So I'd give that to Charles, P4. 5, Carlos Sainz. Given the circumstances in which he had to drive this year, and I keep repeating it, circumstances that no other driver in the history of the sport has had to live with, of his stature, being told that you're leaving the team at the end of the year, but being told that at the start of the year and then going out and doing as well as he did, winning races and driving as well as he did, often upstaging Charles Leclerc, even towards the end of the year, I thought was superb.
Wow.
And after that, I'd say Oscar Piastri, probably.
Yeah, agreed.
Very quick, bit ragged, I think it's difficult to fault Piastri in terms of his racecraft. He was just doing what McLaren let him do. So you can't blame him. It's just like you can't blame Lewis for wanting to go to Ferrari. But I do think he plateaued a bit in terms of his pace relative to Lando in the second half of the year. And there were occasions when it was like, stuff all this early turn-in stuff. I'm just going to get on the power and get this thing going and brake late, and then the mistakes crept in, and I'm just not sure. As I said in another live stream, I'm not sure whether that's just the engineers having no clue about how Oscar really likes to drive relative to Lando, or whether he's confused whenever he looks at Lando's overlays.
Yeah.
Or what? It's something along those lines, I suspect. And so, but I still super quick, and what a great year he had in many ways. So yeah, you have to give it to Oscar. Then I think Lewis, who it's sad that he's there, but I think even he would admit that this season didn't bring the best from him. And 22, 23. I was really surprised at how well he did in a bad car, midfield sometimes, scratching around with the Kevin Magnusons and the Yuki Tsunodas, and he still drove well. I think this year, it kind of 3 years of doing this, I think it just kind of, I've had enough of this. Yeah. Particularly with George obviously stretching the limits every time he gets in the car. So I don't think we saw the best of Lewis, but we did see some very, very good stuff from Lewis. Very good stuff. And that's what obviously he'll be taking to Ferrari. Then I'd say Pierre Gasly. I think he was really quick and managed to create a sort of Michael-like situation at Alpine with all his guys and all his recommendations and all his people. I can smell a lot of Gasly and his management team with the whole Briatore, Ollie Oakes arrival and engineers swaps and things like that. I think a lot of that is driven by Gasly, and I think he's doing a really good job there, and he'll probably have a very good season next year with the Merc engine behind him. Pierre, and then I'd say Fernando, really for the first half of the year, not the second, but he had some very, very good races, didn't he? And he's still Fernando. He's still out there dancing on the pedals and doing what he does.
Go really on then, Mr.
And then finally, I'd do a double barrel 10 split between Nico Hulkenberg and Yuki Tsunoda. I think I'd make 10th equal.
Go on then, Mr. Windsor. I agree with 99% of your picks there, but where the community will again do one of these
great community
divergence and modes of discourse will be Charles Leclerc. I never thought this day would come, Peter, but I feel like you've got Charles Leclerc a bit too low behind George. So the argument was whether I thought the debate would be whether you had Lando or Charles in second place, because many of my mates are
no, I don't have Charles higher than either George or Lando because of the way he quite frequently got beaten by Carlos Sainz. That's why. I mean, how many times did George get straight up beaten by Lewis?
That's fair.
How many times did Lando get straight up beaten by Oscar? In the way that Charles straight up got beaten by Carlos Sainz on several occasions. That's why. You've got to relate it to the teammate because he's the guy in the same car. And I'm not, Carlos Sainz is quick. He's a really quick driver now. And he was quick enough to beat Max in year one in qualifying over a season. This guy's a quick driver. And Charles needed to out-qualify him. In this of all years with Carlos having been given the sack and Charles, obviously the new power at Ferrari, this was the year really to dominate. But he didn't.
Yeah.
He did not do that. And he had some very good races, but he also had some very scrappy weekends, not just races, but weekends in general.
I mean, he made mistakes. He's always had an error of the unforced variety up his sleeve, hasn't he, Peter? But as I look at it, and I've been very harsh on Charles Leclerc, like I've disparaged like the mistakes I think I've always said that will be his principal impediment that will stop him from winning a world championship. But in 2024, Peter, I'm concerned now going into 25 that Lewis is moving to Scuderia at the wrong time. If Lewis is moving like 2-3 years ago, let's say, I would have been full send on Lewis beating Charles. But now that Charles is starting to filtrate out those mistakes, trend them not quite down to zero, but closer to the zero than they've ever been in his career to date, that leaves me with my Lewis Hamilton cap on, super, like, we're filled with trepidation. Peter, I feel like Lewis is fighting Charles at the wrong time. I think he's as good as he's ever been, Charles.
Oh, I think he is, yeah, but he's still not as good as he should be or could be, is more to the point. He's a better driver than we saw overall in 2024.
Yeah.
And I think George got better and better as the year went on. I think Lando did too. I don't think Charles did. I think he kind of stayed the same and still got beaten by Carlos.
Oof.
You know, on occasion. Obviously not every race. And in the wet, Charles is definitely better. But overall, I think, you know, he's not, if you look at, I don't know, if you look at Jackie Stewart against Graham Hill, for example, at BRM, Jackie's second year, he's dominating him by then. And yet, Charles isn't dominating Carlos in the year Carlos is getting sacked. You know, it's bizarre. It's not bizarre. It's just kind of, it's just, I think Charles has still got far too much emotion going on around him. And I've just said many times, you know, he needs to just strip himself of all that stuff, get rid of any, do any media stuff, all the social media, get rid of it all. Just be Charles Leclerc and don't be the good guy. Don't be the bad guy. Just be the guy and go racing and, you know, keep your mouth shut, basically. I'm not saying that in a nasty way. I'm just saying, you know, it'd be easier for him if he did that anyway.
Yeah.
And as for Lewis, I don't think you should worry about Lewis because he's just going to enjoy every millisecond he's at Ferrari, whether he's behind. I don't think he's going there thinking, oh, I've got to beat Charles Leclerc. He's going there thinking, oh, it's such a nice thing to have this great Ferrari offer and this opportunity to finish my career at Ferrari. I'm earning all this money. I'm going to have so many nice moments with them. I'm going to enjoy every millisecond of it in America, South America, Australia, wherever I am. I'm a Ferrari driver. What a mega thing. Oh, wow, look, I'm only 0.2 slower than Charles here. Oh, look, I'm actually 1/10 quicker than him here. You know, he's just going to be relaxed about it. He'll be fine. And he'll drive well as a result of all that relaxation, in my opinion. That's how I think it'll go. But I think over the year, Charles will do, you know, score more points.
Oof. I don't disagree with you, Peter. As much as I would love to, I don't disagree, particularly when you consider Lewis's qualifying performance. Now, I'm going to read something out to you that Lando said, because there's been a lot of talk about mistakes from Lewis, particularly in Sector 3 of Q3. Now, he said that I'm not fast anymore. George will out-qualify me for the rest of the season. And again, I feel like he's saying those words tongue-in-cheek. But there's been a lot of talk of what actually is going on, trying to understand the wheres and the whys as far as Lucy's underperformance versus George in quali. Lando said something, though. He said, as far as this tech spec of car, that in quali, I just want to attack more. And simply, that's the wrong thing to do. Always when we get into qualifying, I want to brake later and just attack, and it's completely the wrong thing to do. That's just my normal way of doing it, and that's incorrect as far as this tech spec of car.
This is Lando talking, right?
That's Lando speaking.
Well, you know, I hate to say it, but it completely bears out everything I've been saying about Lando this year. How many times have I said when he's got a pole or he's been really quick, wow, he's not braking any later here. He's doing what Max does. He's just going into the corner quicker at a speed that Yuki Tsunoda would then find would give him mega understeer or flick oversteer or whatever. And at that moment, when the Yuki Tsunoda moment's about to begin, Lando's got no feet on anything. They're not on the throttle. They're not on the brakes. The car's just settling. And he's doing exactly what Max did throughout the wet Brazilian Grand Prix. That's how he passed people. He didn't pass people by braking later. He passed people by his feel for the car in a totally neutral situation, neutral in the sense of no throttle, no brakes. And that's what Lando's been doing so well this year. And I find it extraordinary that people who do criticize Lando and say, oh, he's not got this to make, he hasn't got the potential to win a world championship or whatever, never ever talk about that side of his driving talent, because it's extraordinary. It's almost as extraordinary as Fernando's initial flick and then the way he controls that with his beautiful footwork. people don't seem to talk about that very much either for some reason. But I mean, that is a great thing about Fernando. But the flick is obviously a negative. But with Lando, he's got this incredible ability, and maybe he's had it all his life. But I have to confess, I only noticed it for the first time in Spa. No, British Grand Prix, Silverstone. I noticed it in qualifying, and maybe he's been doing it all his life. But that to me, the George doesn't do that. Nothing like as well as Lando, and that's a huge, huge plus for Lando. And that's what he means. You're not going to get, and that's where I think Oscar Piastri has come unstuck this year, literally and metaphorically, because he's sort of said, "Oh, stuff this. I'm just going to brake a bit later than Lando or do this or that," and it's led him to trouble. Because then, if you got that approach, late braking, get on the power as soon as possible, inevitably, because of the way the car is different every lap, every corner, something is going to change from the previous corner or the previous lap, and you're going to have slightly more oversteer or slightly less oversteer, and then you're going to brake even later the next lap, and then it's going to end in a drama because it'll be a crosswind. Whereas the way Lando drives, he's got this ability, although he's not doing shorter corner as Max, he's definitely got that ability because of his touch to be able to, at that moment when he's off the throttle on the brakes and he's letting the car settle, that's when he's aware of all the other dynamic things, the crosswind, whatever it is, and he's just letting the car settle in that position, and then he's going. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. Very, very difficult, I imagine, for other racing drivers to emulate, because we're not talking 50 miles an hour here or even 80 miles an hour. We're talking, 148 miles an hour or 160 miles an hour. And it's a fabulous thing that he has.
It's remarkable, Peter, that these drivers in 2024 are having to go slower or drive differently to go faster.
Not really. No, I mean, every category is different. Every category of Formula One is different. And it's all about feel. And if a driver can't adapt to what is the requirements of the new regulations and what his car feels, he shouldn't be a Grand Prix driver anyway, in my opinion. Should take 3 laps to adapt to what is needed. People always used to say that about Daniel Ricciardo. Oh, it's so difficult for him to change his style for the new cars and all this rubbish. It's nonsense. If you're a quick driver, you should be able to get in a Hyundai i20N and join the Hyundai test team in Finland and go within a second of Terry Neuville within a day. And if you can't, go and do something else. Quick driver's a quick driver. Sterling Moss would have been able to do that alongside the greats in rallying, and so would Jim Clark. So would Carlos Reutemann. So would Ayrton Senna, for sure. And I believe if Lando got in a rally car, I think he'd be really, really quick. With that style of driving, I think he'd be phenomenally quick. I think Max would be too. But that's a test, and if they can't adapt, don't do it. Get out of the sport. Wow. It's very easy. It's not easy, but at that level, you have to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
Can't start saying, oh, well, the way these cars have to be driven is this and that. Of course, Lando's right. Since when has late braking ever been quick anyway? It hasn't been quick for the last 20 years, as far as I can see.
I find that really, as a B-spec F1 mind, Peter, reading those phrases, that quote from Lando, and he goes on, he states it even more explicitly. He says, it's hard to do sometimes. There's those times when it's like, don't do it, don't push. I need to drive slower now to go quicker. It's not.
I totally get that. And he can do that. And that's a great thing. And guess what? Where do the lap times actually come from? The slow corners, the time you're not losing on the slow corners. That's usually where the qualifying lap comes from. And most qualifying laps can be divided pretty clearly into various sectors. Obviously in terms of the sector timing, but also in terms of how the tire grip is going to change during the qualifying lap on that one set of tires. And it's thinking about that as well, whether you want the tires at optimum in sector 1 or not, and how important sector 3 is. And all those things, that's what McLaren have done very well with Lando. And they haven't done it that well with Piastri, or Piastri hasn't done it that well, because in seeing that, it's difficult for him to read what Lando's doing. Because if you listen to a lot of the radio, most of the radio to Oscar is based, and Lando for that matter, is based on how to go faster. It's not based on how to go slower. Yeah. If you see my point.
Yeah.
It's always, you can brake later here, you can get on the power sooner there, you can do this, you can do that, higher minimum speed. You never hear, you're braking too late into that, Lando. Or Oscar. Oscar more particularly, actually.
It's a very good
What was it Jim Clark always said? If you want to go quickly, never ever brake later, just come out of the brakes sooner.
Wow.
And that's what Lando's been doing. He's been coming out of the break sooner, and I hate to use that phrase "carrying more speed" because it's just so overused and doesn't mean anything at all. But the reality is, at that moment when he's coming out of the brakes, he's letting the car float and settle, and all four tires are doing a much better job than if they were under heavy load of super late braking or early application of power. They're finding their own grip on the road in a square way. That's what Max does so well, and that's what Fernando does so well.
Is that a sort of not mechanical empathy, but an almost aerodynamic empathy, like asking less
No,
from
it's the
the
same
car?
empathy that Tazio Nuvolari had long before they had wide tires, a little narrow. It's the same empathy that Juan Manuel Fangio had down through the sweeps at Rouen in 1957 in the Maserati. It's feel for the dynamic weight of the car and change of direction and how to make that change of direction the least possible downside. It's all to do with that. And you can practice that. You can definitely practice that. But if you don't have an innate feel, it's very difficult to be a great racing driver. You can be a good racing driver, but to be a great racing driver, very, very difficult. And that innate feel is not just something you're born with. It's a touch thing. Well, it is something you're born with, but it's a touch thing that also manifests itself in other things in life. It will manifest itself in normal road car driving, touch and feel the way if it's a manual gearbox, the way they would use the clutch and the brakes, perfectly seamless, no lumps anywhere. And it would manifest itself in, let me think, possibly things like, it's a good example. Let's trying to think of something away from sport that would be a good example of that. Yeah, it would be things like, I can only speak of Nigel, but when I once saw Nigel under massive pressure at the scene of a road accident on the road, and he was just very calm and very precise in everything he did. There was nothing emotional about it. There was nothing stressed about it. It was feel this guy's jugular. No, he's dead. This guy over here, he's alive. Do this, do that. Everything was perfectly organized in his brain, happening in a very sequential way. And that's part of it as well. Definitely. Whereas I remember when Frank had his road accident, Nelson Piquet just couldn't cope with it. He didn't even, Nigel was the guy that went in the ambulance with Frank from Toulon to Marseille. Nelson just wanted to stay in his road car and follow the ambulance. There's the difference, and it comes under the heading also touch and feel, it is touch and feel for life as well.
Yeah. Wow. Insight levels, Mr. Windsor. Can't get anywhere else. If you're not subscribed to
people ask why I'm a Lando fan. That's the wrong word to describe. I admire his driving tremendously, and I admire his driving tremendously because of his touch, the delicacy of his touch, and also that ability to feel the moment when you can let the car settle and do its thing on its own without Lando Norris telling it what to do, if you see what I mean. And Max has that. Lewis has that. Charles has that if he lets it happen, if he hasn't got something else going on in his brain.
Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me play devil's advocate for a second, because I feel like the becoming Lando Norris nearly in his final form has been one of the story arcs most notable this season. But if I play devil's advocate for a second, I'll leverage Nico Rosberg, who on a podcast very recently said of Lando that there is that his mental fortitude or lack thereof that's the dragon that he'll need to slay for if ever he's going to become a champion. That there is something.
Is that the mental fortitude that told Nico to give up the minute he won the championship because he didn't want to get beaten by Lewis Hamilton?
That must be the very same mental fortitude of which he's. But I think he makes a good point though, Peter. Here's what he said. Lando after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, brilliant performance by the way by Lando and McLaren, the 2.0 second pit stop under pressure for once. Very, very well executed. But immediately after the Grand Prix, Lando said, next year will be my year. And he was talking about the drivers, of course, because they won the Constructors this year. And Nico said of that he sees in Lando facets of himself. And that what Lando's done, his mistake in saying that immediately after a brilliant performance, is that what he's doing is he's feeding into the expectation, pressure, doom loop that Lando, what he wants to see, which is something that you said previously, Peter, is extricate himself from everything that comes with pressure, whether that's social media, whether that's talking to the media, whatever that is. Just dial in with this singularity of focus with a view to deliver on your brilliant racecraft, because he is a brilliant racer. What do you make of that, Peter? Is that what will get Lando Norris over the line?
Well, I think Nico's correct in saying that was the wrong thing to say as he crossed the line. He's definitely correct there. I've made this point before. Really, that should have been the race engineer on the radio saying, "Really, really big apologies, Lando, for what we did in Hungary. We gave you all that guff about think of the championship, and we didn't deliver for you. Big apologies, and thanks again for winning, for giving that win to Piastri." That's what should have been happening as he crossed the line. Obviously, that was never going to happen in 2024 and the way the world is. I make the point about Lando stripping himself of all that stuff, not because I think that will make him a better racing driver. I make that point because I think it will give him a better position in which to handle the horrendous management at McLaren. That's my point. If he becomes this guy that is quite cold and just gets in and does the debriefs in a professional way, but not in a chummy way that he's everybody's mate and he's great on social media, I think that'll put him in a stronger position to be able to say, this is ludicrous. What are you guys thinking? Do you want me to win the championship or not? It's ridiculous at the moment. You know, they gave a win. They took a win away from him to give it to Piastri on the basis that they would then help him win the championship in 2024. I mean, what was that all about? Think about it. I mean, that was it. That was the spiel on the radio. Think of the championship, Lando. Think if you want the team behind you for the championship, this is the right thing to do. What was that all about? Think about it. Think how quick Lando is when, has been on occasions and was after that race, and he still couldn't get a sniff.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. His racing is nothing to do with how he goes against Max or George or Charles or Lewis. It's what happens alongside Oscar Piastri. That's the only thing that matters in the life of Lando Norris. And the only way he's going to get on top of that is if he gets on top of the McLaren management, in my opinion.
Wow.
And one way of doing that, one way of helping that along is to strip himself of all that rubbish, the media stuff, and become a really cold, hard professional in a sort of Michael Schumacher-like way, and, trample on everybody within the team, if you see what I mean.
Don't disagree.
It's difficult for him to do that because he's a big mate of Zach Brown's, and Zach won't let that happen because he wants it to be one big happy family. And if next year if you said to Zach now, I'm going to sign a contract with you now, Zach, Oscar Piastri is going to be world champion next year and McLaren are going to win the Constructors' Championship, do you think he's going to say, "Oh, I'm not going to sign that"?
I think he'd be
exactly. So that's the problem, isn't it?
Wow.
The problem is how Lando overcomes the forces at McLaren and therefore has a real chance of beating Max or Charles or Lewis or George. But he's got to beat Piastri before he beats those other guys.
And to that point, Peter, do you think to save a dying puppy, where does your money go for next year, the Drivers' Championship?
At the moment, I would still give it to Max because he seems to have the most uncluttered view of the season, really. He's just got Liam Lawson alongside him, fast, quick guy who won't give him any trouble. He's got the same team. They've proved they can win without Adrian already. A lot of motivation there. It's going to be a scrappy season, I think, because I think everybody's going to be quick at various times. McLaren will probably again still have the best car over a year. So it's going to be maximizing every opportunity when the car is going well and obviously finishing on the podium if you can when you're having an off weekend with the car. And I think Red Bull and Max are very, very good at doing that. Ferrari is going to be a bit of a mess, probably in terms of the championship because of, Lewis, Charles, all the stuff that's going on around them. And it's hard to see that they're going to have a car that's going to be demonstrably better than it is right now. Mercedes, you could say George has got a pretty clear view of everything now with Antonelli in the other car, clear number one. But it's Mercedes, isn't it? What are they going to get wrong technically on the car? I never thought we'd be saying that about Mercedes for so long, and it's been going on since 2022 now. And if you look at Mercedes' history in the sport, there's never been a run like this of the car being so uncompetitive. So they need to get their act together. I doubt they will be able to. They're just probably thinking of 26 onwards now. So that's it. I think given all of, then there's McLaren, as I've just said, there's McLaren's going to be a fight between Lando and Oscar, and they're going to start taking points from one another as they did this year. And it's going to be, and because of that, Max isn't going to have that problem of Liam taking points from him. No. He's going to be maximizing every race in that sense.
And Christian spoke to this, didn't it? Again, I think Red Bull are listening to your podcast, Mr. Windsor, because Christian spoke to this on TalkSport and said you can't have two centre forwards in F1. You've got to. He spoke about Scuderia Ferrari and the problems that they'll be presented with by having Lewis and Charles in the car, and saying that they've got to back a horse. But of course, strategic objective is to back both horses, and in that there is lap time that they will lose. That per your words, Peter, if you've got a Charles Leclerc, then you don't need a Lewis Hamilton. Same as Max Verstappen. You've got a Max Verstappen.
Exactly. Yeah, I think with Ferrari it's slightly different because I don't think Lewis in a bad car, if the car's mediocre, I don't think Lewis is going to be as quick as Charles and therefore take points from him. Finish maybe third when Charles fourth, for example. They would in a good car. I think Lewis can beat him, but in a bad car, I'm not sure he would. I think more of the problem at Ferrari is that all the hoopla around Lewis and the amount of publicity and exposure and paparazzi and tifosi and all that stuff that's going to be around the team now it's going to be quite a big sort of animal to carry around with them and to sort of get through all that down to the bare basics of going motor racing. It's not going to be easy. Freddie Vasseur is probably better placed to be doing that than any other human being on the planet. He's very, very good at cutting away all the rubbish. But Ferrari have brought it upon themselves, and that's that. And if Lewis doesn't start well, but there's all this hoopla around him, that's going to create another storm of its own making that's going to build up as they get towards Imola or whatever, or Monaco, and that's all. Why is Lewis? And you can just see it all happening. It's a big animal to control. As I say, Freddie's got a nice big whip, and he'll be able to control most of that. But why do that? When they could have just kept Carlos and just focused and stayed lean, mean, and clean and gone racing.
Because they want to build a luxury brand as opposed to a sports brand, isn't it?
Why?
Peter?
Why the hell do they want to build a luxury brand? Ferrari aren't about luxury brands. They're about, very bare 250 Testarossas and GTOs. That's what Ferrari's all about. It's not about luxury brands. That's why Porsche have gone off the boil, because they start building luxury SUVs. It's nonsense. Bigger is not better. More money is not necessarily the answer. As we've seen so many times.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Peter. But again, with my accounting cap on, there is a responsibility that...
stakeholders.
100%. Shareholders.
Well, stakeholders should be banned. We shouldn't have stakeholders at all. Get rid of them all. They ruin everything because they don't know anything about the actual, whatever it is that they're holding.
Yeah.
The stake that they're holding. They have no clue, generally.
They're not racing people. And again, to loop the circle.
I don't know why we need them. We can get racing, we can get sponsorship money, we can get TV money. Why do we need all these stakeholders all the time? What's that all about? It can only be about money, which has got to be wrong and bad, surely.
I think since F1 is $1 billion entity now, there will always be hangers on and sponsors.
But surely everybody, based on Corey Pesatoro's stats, surely everybody is now saying, well, quite clearly, we have to look at the way Jim Clark went racing, and he actually didn't worry about money at all, to the point where Ford actually went to him and said, we'd like to pay you a little bit more money, Jimmy. Is that okay? And he said, yeah, fine. No problem. Here's my bank account. Surely they're all thinking, maybe that's what we should be doing now. Get rid of all these stakeholders, all these people that want to make the teams too big, too expensive and control too much when they haven't got a clue what they're doing. And just go back to normal motor racing with sponsorship, maybe even some prize money. How about that? We've got all that nice TV money coming in. There's too much money in the sport anyway. Get rid of the stakeholders. I think this is the new hashtag. Stakeholders out! Exclamation mark.
I think, sadly, Peter, this is one of those Pandora box-esque circumstances that, sadly, once the financial horse has bolted, there is no getting it back, Peter. You can't unwind that once people have had a taste of.
No, we probably need some calamitous natural disaster, don't we? Just to bring everything back to square one. When Motoring News publishes again with black and white photographs, and Motorsport publish race reports that are 14,000 words long with no pictures. Mega. Love it.
Oh, better times, Mr. Windsor.
Yeah, definitely.
As always, you've been super generous with your time. You've been a legend, Mr. Windsor. I think this is our final catch-up of the year.
Well, it's our Christmas edition, isn't it? So
honestly, Mr. Windsor, I can't thank you enough. The viewers can't thank you enough. If it would be remiss of me not to. I'm
not sure what they'll say about it after this episode, but they
behave.
No, I'm sure they'll be. They know a lot of it is not tongue in cheek, but a lot of it is just sheer bitter cynicism, isn't it?
I know what they'll say. They'll say, Cameron, you got 10-7'd by Peter Windsor again. This is a worse beating than Fury and Usyk over the weekend.
No, you didn't beat me at all. It's just been a friendly chat.
No, you 10-7'd me, Windsor. As always, Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend. Listen, if you like your F1 stats and insight of the God tier variety, and you're not subscribed to the Peter Windsor YouTube channel, what are you doing with your life? Genuinely, in earnest, go and subscribe to Peter Windsor on YouTube. Check out all of the multi-language channels too, and shortly thereafter, get yourself over to your favourite podcasting platform and follow and 5-star the Short Corner podcast with Peter Windsor. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to like and share and comment. Between now and next time, as always, Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend. Thank you so much.
And can I add that if you want to reboot, go and watch Terry Neuville testing in Finland on the new Hankook tyres. It will blow your mind.
What's the channel again? Do you remember the channel?
It's called Passats de Canto.
There we go.
And then once you get in there, just say Neuville testing Finland, and you'll think, wow, yeah, I see what Windsor's on about now.
There we go. If there was a recommendation that
and there's even a moment when he actually loses the back and he goes a bit too quickly. But guess what? He just stays on the throttle and manages to wipe some of the snow away and keeps going. It's brilliant. I keep interrupting.
Behave yourself, Peter. He's a different gravy, that is. And if you need a recommendation for some motorsport watching over the Christmas period, then therein lies your choice, your pole sitter. You've been a legend, Mr. Windsor, as always. Thank you so much for the time. Between now and next time, peddlers, remember to look but never stare.